Stayed to hear the senator from Washington speak because I think this highlights the issue. That's a terrific political speech, but it bears no resemblance to what's actually happening in the student loan debate. I mean, the distinguished senator from Washington talked about rates going up. Rates are going up for 6 million middle-income students in America who are going to be taking out loans this year. And the Democratic proposal does nothing for them. Does nothing for them. All they're trying to do is for 1 year do a political fix for 40% of the students who are already the beneficiary of Pell Grants, as she so ably expressed, who have their interest paid while they're in college. These are the subsidized loans. These students may receive a Pell Grant of up to $5,500 or so. They may have their interest paid while they're in college. This whole accounting system that we're talking about, that the Congressional Budget Office has discussed, is done in a way that's very generous to students as opposed to taxpayers, because it's done under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which is more generous to students in this case than taxpayers. But what about the 6 million middle-income students who are just swinging in the wind under the Democratic proposal? Does nothing for them. Now, on the other hand, you have the President of the United States, a Democrat. We have the House of Representatives, a majority Republican. They fundamentally agree on one idea. Let's have a permanent solution. Let's figure out what it costs the taxpayer to borrow money from the government, over $100 billion a year, and loan it to the students at no profit, so that the students can use it, all of them, not 40% of them, not just low-income students, middle-income students as well. All of them will have their rates lowered. So what would the effect be? Their proposal would fix for a year the student loan interest rate on 40% of the loans at 3.4%. Our proposal, the bipartisan proposal, fundamentally like the President's proposal and the House of Representatives' passed solution, the solution they've passed, would for undergraduates, all undergraduates, lower the rate to 3.66%, not just for 40% of the students, it would be for middle-income students as well. And for graduate students as well, their rates would be lower than 6.8%. So what is good about a short-term political fix that makes middle-income students and graduate students pay more? Hundreds of millions of dollars more over the next 10 years. What's good about that? All it does is provide an opportunity to make a well-rehearsed political speech about student loans. We all want to encourage students to go to college. We're looking for a way to give them some predictability and some certainty, so that student doesn't have to worry when they graduate from Maryville High School in Tennessee, where I went. Well, Congress isn't going to get its job done. All they're going to do is stand up there and make political speeches, have nothing to do with the issue. In this case, the President's doing his job. He's recommended a long-term solution. The Republican House of Representatives has done its job. It passed a long-term solution that lowers rates for everybody. A group of 6 senators here doing our jobs. We've introduced a bipartisan proposal that reduces rates for everybody, and that's a long-term solution. But a number of the Democratic senators are playing political games. They're ignoring reality, and they're leaving 6 million students across this country who are middle income and who are headed to college. They're going to freeze in for 10 years higher rates on their loans, rates that are nearly twice as high as the bipartisan proposal here, which is fundamentally like the President's proposal and the House proposal. Now, what is the wisdom in that? What is the wisdom in that? I don't see it, Mr. President, and I don't think the students will see it. As far as balancing the budget on the back of students, the only people around here doing that have been the Democrats when they passed the health care law. They put in there a takeover of the federal student loan program, and according to the Congressional Budget Office, they had an amount of savings, $50 or $60 billion, and they used part of it to reduce the debt. So the CBO says these are savings because you took over student loans, and the Democrats said we'll use it to reduce the debt. or use it on the Pell Grant program, and they use it to help pay for the health care law. Every single year for the next 5 years, 6 years, students are being overcharged to help pay for the health care law. So we want to get in a big political discussion about who's overcharging students in order to reduce the deficit or pay for the health care law. Well, we can have that. But that's not what we want to do. We want a result. And we've suggested to the Senate, and I'm going to say it one more time, instead of a 40% political fix for 1 year, for 40% of the students, we've suggested a long-term solution for 100% of the students. It reduces their rates. It cuts nearly in half the interest rate for every single undergraduate loan, every single one. That's 2/3 of the loans. And it's based on an idea that was in the president's budget that's already been passed by the House of Representatives and that's been introduced by 3 on that side of the aisle and 3 on this side of the aisle. Now, a Senate that was interested in a result instead of political gamesmanship would be sitting down and trying to work that out. That's what we want to do. Now, we can play games too, I suppose, and I can go get my statistics and I can come out and say, you over on the Democratic side, when you passed the health care bill, you did it on the backs of students. And when you balanced the budget, which you haven't done, you tried to do it on the backs of students. And when you found some money for the Pell Grants, you overcharged the people that you were loaning student loan money to. That's true. I could do that. I could say that, but I didn't come here to spend all my time saying that. I came here to get some results. So this isn't a game for 10 or 11 million students across this country. They are trying to figure out how they're going to pay for college. Just as the senator from Washington said, it's not easy to do. They expect us to come up here with our backgrounds and say, we're going to do the best we can. And isn't a good principle to say, instead of making this like what we call the doctor's fix, where we come in every year and play a little politics and add a little money to pay doctors who work with Medicare patients? That's really a terrible thing to do, but we do it every year. So we're going to make student loans in the same way. And in presidential election year, everybody will make a big speech about it. 10 or 11 million students will sit around wondering how they're going to pay for college and waiting for the people in Washington to make a decision about that. We shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't be doing that. And we have great promise here. We have great promise here. I mean, we got a president making a long-term solution, a House of Representatives of a different party agreeing with him, and 6 of us on both sides of the aisle proposing a solution that is a permanent solution for 100% of the 10 or 11 million people who will be borrowing over $100 billion this year in 18 million loans. I mean, why would they, on the other side of the aisle, insist on a solution that forces 6 million, mostly middle-income students to pay 6.8% when they could be paying 3.66%? Why would you do that? Because you haven't thought about it, I think. Lots been going on. We've had an immigration debate. We're doing a lot of other things. So maybe senators haven't taken a look at that. I have. I've had a chance to do that. I've been president of university. I've been the education secretary. I know something about the student loan program. I didn't like it when the federal government took it over. I admire our United States Secretary of Education. I don't think he ought to be the banker of the year. I think we have banks to make loans, but that's not the way it is. The taxpayers now make all the government loans. So it's over $100 billion a year. And what we are saying is students are making their plans. They're going to be arriving at college in August and September. We've got a bipartisan proposal that will lower interest rates for every single student taking out a student loan, yet our friends on the other side want to leave middle-income students out of it. Force them to pay twice as much in many cases as they should be in interest rates for the next 10 years. That makes no sense. We ought not to do it. So tomorrow what we ought to do is we should be passing the Burr-Manchin proposal that's supported on both sides of the aisle. To the extent it differs with the president's proposal, which is very slight, and with the House of Representatives proposal, which is not much, we should then sit down, work something out over the next 3 days, pass it, send it to the president, and go on to the next issue. Instead, we've got political speeches about how hard it is to go to college. We all know how hard it is to go to college. It's difficult to do. We all want to help. But if we have a solution, we ought to adopt it. So Mr. President, I could play politics too. I know how. Every one of us knows how in this room. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. This is not a time for playing politics. This is serious business. 10 million students getting 18 million loans, $100 billion plus from the American taxpayers. We have a proposal before us that is fair to the taxpayers, won't cost them any money. It's fair to the students. It doesn't balance the budget or pay for the health care program or any other thing on the student's back. And it gives students, many of whom who have no credit rating, no other way to get money, a chance to get several $1,000s a year at one of the lowest possible rates available in the country. One of the lowest possible rates in the country. And the proposal that's before the Senate that's bipartisan is a permanent solution. It says to the student going to the University of Tennessee or of Alaska or Minnesota, you get a loan this year from the government and you're an undergraduate, the interest rate's 3.66%, you've got it for 10 years. If you're a middle income student, the Democrats' plan says it's 6.8%. And they say, wait for what? Wait for rates to go up? Why don't we establish this program for students at a time when rates are low? That's to their advantage. Let's have a permanent solution at a time when rates are low. And they may go up, and therefore students may pay more, but they'll pay a lot less more than they would if they're out in the private market. And they'll have a lot more certainty than if we just come around and play politics with this every year to try to gain some advantage with this student group or that student group. So, Mr. President, we have an opportunity before us. The immigration bill passed before the recess. It showed a good deal of ability of people on both sides of the aisle to work together. Did that with the Farm Bill, did that with the Water Resources Bill. I would submit this is 100 times easier than any of those bills. When I went home to Tennessee before the July 4th recess, I said to somebody who asked me, we're that far apart. And we've got the president, the Republican House, and a bipartisan group of senators all in about the same place. This ought to be easy to do. It's still easy to do. But I would implore my senators to look at the facts, those on the other side of the aisle, and realize I don't think you want to go home and explain why you're leaving 6 million middle-income students twisting in the wind, paying twice as much on interest rates for the next year as the proposal that you're about to vote against tomorrow. I think that'll be pretty hard to explain, and I'll bet there'll be a lot of explaining to do if that's the end result. So I pledge, as I've been working with Secretary Duncan, with the White House, with Democrats and Republicans, to try to get a result here. I think we can still do it in the next few days. I would hope we could have a vote on both proposals tomorrow. My guess would be both would fail at this point, but at least that would show that we're seriously working toward a solution, and we can sit down and merge these small differences we have between the bipartisan group here, the Republican House, and the President of the United States. I thank the President. I yield the floor. And notice the absence of a